All right. Um, well, thank you everyone for coming. This is Lisa King, author of Blue Haven, and she's gonna start us off by telling us all about her book, her connections to it, and everything along those lines. Take it
Sounds
away.
sounds good. So yes, hi, I'm Lisa. First off, I just want to thank Lou and Liz at the Story Plan here for inviting me tonight, and again to all of you for joining. I'm always so grateful when people take hours out of their busy and valuable lives to read a story I made up. So thank you so much for reading Blue Haven, and thanks for coming. I've really been looking forward to our chat tonight. So yes, I'll kick things off by starting with a bit about how Blue Haven came to be, which also touches on how I became an author, as the two share a bit of an intertwined journey. So people often ask me, did you always want to be an author? And the answer is no, I didn't always want to be an author. For most of my life, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I still don't in ways. And I've really been hung up on that question since folks first started asking me as a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? Becoming a thing has always struck me as a massively intimidating decision. There's something so final and singular and self-explanatory about it. Like what you decide to be is in effect who you are or who people think you are. And yeah, lot of pressure there. Um, Anyways, after years of deliberation, I went to university thinking I would become something in the medical field. Realized shortly thereafter that blood is gross. And so I landed in the social sciences, considered majoring in English, tried to read Ulysses, and then promptly considered majoring in something else. Apologies if that's like your favorite book. I took probably every career test offered freely on the internet, researched every profession under the sun, and somehow ended up studying psychology and then neuroscience and graduated with a piece of paper that didn't really make me anything at all. Don't worry, I won't continue to drag you down an exhausting existential path of career ambiguity. That's more of a multi-hour symposium with probably some necessary microdosing. But point being, something in me shifted when I started thinking less about what I wanted to be and more about what I wanted to do. And when you start thinking about what it is you want to do, a person realizes they can do lots of things. And for me, one of those things became writing. I'd always loved reading and also enjoyed writing. And sometime in my early 20s, after I'd stayed up for probably like 40 hours straight reading the Twilight trilogy and was thus both entirely smitten and totally delusional, I thought, I could probably write a book. Let's give it a shot. And so an idea came to me about a woman who'd recently moved into this picture perfect, gated suburban utopia I was calling Rosehaven, where everything was perfect until it wasn't. At which point, this woman became quickly convinced that someone was trying to keep her trapped in Rosehaven and shield her from the truth, only to discover that person was herself. Plot twist. So I'm not sure where this idea came from. I was intrigued at the time by the notion of people being their own worst enemy, and also happiness as this achievable state or place or destination you can arrive at and hopefully stay. So I had a plot line-ish, like literally just one line of plot and one character. And from there, I just went for it. I visited my local coffee shops and got these funky, cool writer glasses. And I started carrying around one of those cute little idea scribble notebooks. And things were going pretty great at first until around the 1 month mark, at which point I realized I had no idea what I was doing, where the story was going, what Rosehaven was, or why it existed, which are all, of course, very crucial answers to have when writing a story. So I pressed pause on Rosehaven, its title at the time, and I didn't write for a while after that. I became very bogged down by that negative voice that can take control. And mine was telling me, like, I wasn't a writer, I wasn't an author. And it took me another year or so to realize I'd once again been tricked by this idea of being something instead of doing something. So I started writing again, and I started doing a lot of other things too. I got a job researching veteran mental health. I deepened my love of cooking and also eating. I traveled to beautiful tropical destinations like Thailand and the Philippines and Aruba. I got married, I had a kid, and through it all, I wrote. I wrote other things that weren't Rosehaven, starting with a blog buried so far down the internet at this point, I don't think I could find it if I tried. And that is not a challenge because it should probably stay there. I also wrote a book about an imaginary boy that took me like years to finish and has never been published. I wrote a story called Vanishing Hour that also took me years to finish and landed me an agent and a wonderful opportunity to publish here with the Story Plant. All the while, I never stopped thinking about that first book attempt, Rosehaven being its title at the time. And the unfinished nature of that story really haunted me, and also its potential. So in 2019, I decided to revisit the first manuscript I ever attempted, and I began to actually flesh out the storyline. I thought about what kind of place a haven might be, what purpose it could serve. I started thinking about how we define paradise, how that intertwines with happiness, and what would happen if we could somehow materialize the two more precisely. Who could we help, and also who would we help, as those are two very different questions with different answers. And when I returned to Rosehaven a second time around, all the experiences I'd acquired over the years of actually doing stuff provided context and depth to the story. What was formerly a very cookie cutter Stepford Wives type of suburban utopia evolved to become Blue Haven, a tropical destination heavily inspired by my own version of paradise, having traveled to these beautiful places like Thailand and Mexico and the Philippines. All these adventures shaped my world building when I went to go write the book. The brain-body interfaces I'd started learning about in grad school, coupled with binge watching like so many sci-fi series on Netflix, specifically Black Mirror, brought to life this idea of a neural net and made me think about how science and tech could realistically alter a person's experience of the world in the possibly near-ish future. Having written several other books at that point, even if some weren't published, had sharpened my writing skills and my thinking skills. I knew by then the necessity of tools like an outline or having a plot that wasn't just a one-liner. Also, my research in mental health really deepened my empathy for the characters in this book and made me think about how impoverished mental health treatment still is, how people like Bibbs and Wesley and others, they absolutely deserve better. Having a child particularly and experiencing that sort of love gave me insight into how a loss of that caliber could truly devastate a person, like how Eloise lost Linus. Even being married gave me a deeper understanding of the challenges and sacrifices and what love can drive us to do as people. So in short, all these things I'd done during the years I wasn't writing Blue Haven prepared me to actually write and finish the story when I got right down to it. And so just this past summer, Blue Haven, as you know, was published by the Story Plant, finally making its way into the world 13 years after my first attempt to write it, after I first tried to write a book, which was a very full circle moment for me as an author, but also more so just a gal who likes to write. So that's a bit of background.
Does anyone have any initial questions or comments before I start asking my own?
It's really fascinating to hear about your journey. You've talked a little bit about how your life experience changed the book, but was it interesting for you to go back and sort of step into that shoes and bring you backwards? Like, to me, that's really fascinating, to go revisit the person that you were when you were writing it the first time and sort of meeting those two people together.
Yeah, for sure. It was interesting. I guess when I reread it, so I'd reread it maybe once before I actually tried to rewrite it. And that time I reread it, I was like, this is just hot garbage. But going through it a second time and actually trying to write a book and turn it into something more, for sure, was like meeting up with a past version of myself. You know, I could see like the insecurities and like a lot of rambling too. But it definitely was, I mean, you don't normally have maybe drafts that have the span of a decade in between them almost, right? Before you start to go back and revisit and rewrite. So it was kind of a unique unique experience.
I'm thinking that maybe it was a little like what Aloe felt when she found the diary, which was actually she was finding herself. As I said, I was totally absorbed by this book. I kept talking to my husband about it, and then he made me watch V for Vendetta because she in the movie, I don't know if you're familiar with the movie, but she gets secret messages and while she's in prison and doesn't know who they're coming from. And I won't spoil the movie for you, but I was one of the really unsettling things about this book. I mean, because it unsettled me a lot, was that I was never quite sure what it was going to be. It started out like some kind of fantasy, and I'm reading it and thinking, gee, would I be willing to give up everybody in my life to live in this amazing place and eat, gourmet food from Gordon Ramsay or whoever it was. And then it suddenly became like a horror book when she starts seeing the mutations on her fellow residents there. And then it becomes almost like an imprisoning book when she's trying to escape and she hits the glass wall. I'm wondering how you were planning. I mean, I don't think that books need to be slotted into genres, but it just seemed like you were, and then it became more of almost a scientific, when she leaves the Blue Haven and becomes a researcher again. I mean, you were really playing with our heads a lot there.
Yeah, apologies for that. I think I definitely like to blend genres a lot. I pictured this as more like more futuristic sci-fi when I first started to write it. And then I think my background in neuroscience and trying to come up with like how we could get from point A to point B pulled it a lot closer and made it almost more like a speculative fiction in some ways, because this doesn't seem that far off necessarily to me. And maybe that's what brought it even more into the realm of thriller and horror is it doesn't seem like a huge jump to get to a place like this, at least for me personally. So yes, I like to blend lots of things together. And I guess in this one particularly, keeping people guessing was at the forefront. And trying to leave a lot of breadcrumbs so that this was the first thriller I've ever written. So trying to have people think one direction and then hopefully kind of surprise the readers, plot twisty, that sort of thing.
It sounds like your college major did definitely influence the writing of this book.
Yeah.
Do you think you would have known a lot, like the mental health kind of side of things, without like having that kind of like history learning about it?
I don't think so. In my day job, I work still with veterans in a mental health clinic. And so I have a lot of behind the scenes access to patient information, and reading their stories has really shaped me as a person. And yes, having a background in neuroscience, I think bringing all of those together, without that, I don't think I could have written this book or the aspects of this book. Or it would have taken me a long time to research, much longer than it actually did, having been kind of more familiar with the subject matter.
Gotcha. Would you say any of like the characters have drawn from like your own experience? Like I know you just mentioned working with veterans and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think Wesley is kind of like the classic PTSD patient that we would see in the clinic that I work at. He kind of personifies the typical individual that we're trying to treat. So he certainly is kind of an averaged out version, I guess, of many of the clients that I see in my day-to-day work.
So definitely helpful that, like, I feel like the reason you could write this after like 13 years really just went throughout taking your whole history and kind of put it all together. Does anyone else have any initial questions before I start asking you, everyone in the audience, the questions about the book?
I just have a statement I wanted to make as far as the beginning of the book. There was a constant conversation because like you, Barbara, I was talking to my husband about this book the entire time. And I kept saying, I don't know, is it like a Truman Show thing? Or is it like, I was always trying to figure out exactly. And there was actually a statement, I think it's right around just before the sushi restaurant episode. And she talks about being an active thinker or overactive thinker. And I kind of had to laugh because I thought, well, that's what you've done to us. Like, we're constantly thinking like, what is this? What is this? What is this the whole time? And then I have to say too, my favorite thing, page 85, when when you said, even children know you shouldn't read scary books at night. Because every night at 2 o'clock in the morning, I was still up reading. So yeah, that made me laugh.
I love that. Well, then I'll start asking you guys some questions. And first one is going to be fun. So, like when trying to imagine your own version of paradise, what would yours be like? Like, how would it differ from Blue Haven? And this is for everyone.
Mine would actually have alcohol. I will add that.
Mm.
I don't think I could have one place. I'd have to have
Multiple places.
multiple places, different types of environments.
What if it was like one place with like different climates, like throughout, like you got like the desert in one part, like the beach on the other side, like the tundra.
Yeah, I there's got to be something cold. There's got to be something warm. There's got to be fall. Good New England fall in it. And probably the coast of Maine. Would be a couple. I probably would like a piece of Utah in it. And I would visit the beach for a little bit, but even though I'm a water person, beaches don't do that much for me.
Yeah, you gotta have the other side, the snow.
Yeah, snow down there's another matter.
Anyone else have their own versions of paradise?
Mine would involve no alcohol and lots of dogs.
That's a good point.
I like the idea of having people do things for me. I mean, that's my little fantasy. But
And I guess the real question would be, what would it take for you to leave like everything you knew behind to go, like would you ever even consider taking everything that you knew and leaving it behind to go live somewhere that is of your wildest dreams?
I would.
Nope.
I feel like given the history that we know about Aloe, it made like the made up history, it makes sense that like it made sense to me when I was first reading it. I was like, this makes sense that she would consider this. Like I was like, I still don't personally think I would do it, even in her shoes, but also I was like, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot you could do by winning the lottery though. So I was like, she could have easily like made her own paradise. But
I think
considering how she didn't really know.
I think it's a fantasy, a fleeting fantasy that we all have at some time. Like when you're really being pestered and pulled on and you just say, oh, I wish I could just get away from all of this and go someplace and be pampered and have all these people who are making demands on me go away. And it's not something that I would want permanently, but there has definitely been moments in my life where I've just thought, oh, F you all, I just want to go away and just be left alone in some beautiful paradise where people do the cooking and make my bed and I can lie on a beach. I am a beach person. But so, again, it does play with that fantasy because I kept toying with that in my head as I was reading. How long could I stand this? As Alice, I think, starts to realize that the people who are supposed to be her grandmother, who she's talking to is not really her grandmother. And she starts to make that realization, if I couldn't talk to my kids who show up for dinner, I think there are times when I really would be happy, but most of the time, 93% of the time, I would really not want them out of my life. So
I think that's that to me was such the crux of the book is that everybody who was there was choosing this to leave something really tragic and painful behind. And without that, without that motivation, how many of us would give up everything that, kudos to you, Lisa. I think that's, to me, that was a really hard, I was nervous for you to see how you were going to stick the landing on the book, because it asks that question of, are you better off not knowing the thing that's given you the most love and the most pain, in order to relieve the pain of it? So that was fascinating to me to come to the conclusion, and for me to have felt okay with where you ended up with it.
Well, and to think too that Aloe went to a paradise that she didn't even know, like she didn't know what an Hermes scarf was, and she'd never had sushi. And so there was a paradise element that it wasn't really even her paradise. Like she didn't know those things. So
Yeah, I would tend to think too, like without, the whole neuro dad and the brain stimulation part, even being to like all-inclusive resorts, what seems like paradise at first gets kind of old fast. You get really bored on day 5. You're like, are we going to do the same thing again? So I think it would be, unless you have someone kind of trying to control your happiness, I'm not even convinced Blue Haven would be that great. For longer than maybe 4 or 5 days.
Oh, I totally agree. I was thinking that too when I was reading it. Like, how long would I really be able to manage here? Especially like coming in like alone. Like, at least like the couple that was together, like they were together. Like they had each other, even though like their circumstances they don't remember. But like I feel like the idea of like having someone else too makes the experience of paradise like a little better. And like something that can last longer. I mean, I guess if you like the person, like if you're fighting all the time, I don't think it'll fix much.
we
Um,
You and I never
find
talked about this when we were working on the novel, but you pulled off a magic trick here, and I wonder how conscious you were of it. It is very, very difficult. Am I coming through? Because I just got a message that my connection is bad.
You are coming through now, but you
Okay.
were not for a minute.
What I was saying is you pulled off a magic trick, because it is extremely difficult to write about intense grief without pulling the story away, without dragging the entire story down. And I thought you did it really, really well. I thought you managed to keep it just north of the abyss. How conscious of that were you when you were writing it?
I think a little bit just by virtue of protecting my own mental health. I find that's what is my indicator, is when I start to get dragged down like too deep into it, that I'm like, okay, this isn't pleasant. So I think that was my check and balance. And even still, writing it partly during the pandemic, I got into some pretty, sad headspaces, right? Trying to imagine all of these things. But for me, I think that was where I struck a chord, was just my own kind of feelings as I was writing it. And also trying to keep that, you get through the paradise part before you start to learn about that. So it's not sucking people in, I guess, from the beginning as much. It's a little bit lighter at that point. So you're delaying it a bit more. And I think that helps too. So somewhat conscious, probably didn't realize I was pulling off a magic trick, but thank you very much for that.
It is considerably harder than you may have realized. What you were doing is very, very difficult to pull off.
Well, thank you.
My next question is for everyone, including Lisa, to answer. Who was your favorite resident in Blue Haven and why? I'd say me personally, it was probably Wesley. I really liked him.
Wesley, I was going to say Wesley. I was even hoping that he and Ella would, get together.
Me too.
There were sparks there. There was chemistry there. So
I thought about that for a day, but
Must have been so uncomfortable for Eloise's husband, though, to like watch this, because you can
Yeah.
very clearly see a connection there.
there was potential, right? A couple sparks of chemistry.
Yeah, but that would have been too predictable.
Yeah,
And the whole novel was not predictable.
that would have taken me in a whole different direction, adding another layer of genre onto the
Yeah.
covered story.
Anyone else have a favorite character?
I don't think I had a favorite character. I think everybody just kind of melded together perfectly there.
I really liked writing Bibbs. I found him to be just kind of a joyful character to write for me personally. He made me feel happy and amused.
He was fun.
Yeah, yeah.
I like
A little over the top there.
Yeah, just like big theatrical, like taking
Yeah.
up the whole room space with his energy.
I love learning like their alter egos, like who they were in Blue Haven and who they were outside of Blue Haven. Like that was such a huge surprise.
Yeah.
Jack was another favorite of mine. When I like really met Jack, I was like, like he's such a great husband, and yet obviously Eloise can't really help it. But it was one of those things where I was like, and then everything else happened.
He's a good dude.
And so in the first part of the book, we meet happy versions of Wesley, Bibbs, Bob, and Franny. And then later we learn about the people they were before Blue Haven, who are obviously different characters altogether. Do our memories and experiences, good or bad, make us who we are? This one's a pretty deep question. I feel like once they're taken away, they change everything, but I think that they definitely play a really big role in who they are. So kind of like taking those experiences away from them, while it'll make them happier, really just completely changes everything about who they are and who they thought they were.
Yeah, I'm curious, Lisa, actually, in that regard, when you were drafting and you wrote their backstories, did you go back to the beginning and sort of see, like, it would be interesting to read it a second time. Did you go back and see things about those characters that you didn't know when you were originally writing them until you found their stories later? You figured out their real stories later.
Yeah, I think like I knew who they were going to be before I wrote them in the first place. So that kind of helped me to, I guess, characterize them the way I wanted, knowing who they were as people and their backstories. I guess when I first wrote these characters, I tried to make them a little bit more two-dimensional almost, because I do think that you need those memories and the entirety of your experiences to make you who you are. And if you just crop out kind of one part of you, then what you're left with is maybe someone who's really joyous and can stay in a place like Blue Haven forever, and they're happy, but they're lacking a little bit of dimension almost. And it's actually funny, what someone who reviewed this book like wrote some comment about how those characters, she couldn't connect with them, and they were kind of a little bit more flat in places. And I was like, oh, that's kind of good. I think that's kind of what I was going for a little bit. So thanks for your 2 stars, but whatever. Came across. So yeah.
But if you take away all those unfortunate memories that you have, it feels like you would also lose empathy and compassion that you gain from unfortunate circumstances.
Totally.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think too, with like some of the reviews, a lot of I definitely seen like a review that's said that they didn't finish it, and it's like the book doesn't make sense unless you finish it. And I feel like you have to really like immerse yourself in this story, and it's one of those stories that like really, like, I read it, I think I just read it on like a literally between like an airport and a plane ride, because it was just like easy to just get through. And I felt like if I didn't read it all like pretty much in one go for the most part, that it wasn't going to really come together with as much emotion as it kind of brought on to me personally. Especially because you have to really like understand the characters and then totally reconstruct them.
Yeah,
think
that
the
is a bit risky too.
The short chapters also, I have to say, because again, I'm a late night reader, and those short chapters and the chapter breaks where they happened, you're like, just one more, just, oh,
Yep.
look, it's only 2 pages, just one more, just one
Yep.
more. And then just going and going. And then you're like,
Really
yeah, now it's
hoping
3, now it's
for
3
that.
in the morning. So,
Come on, keep reading. One more. You got one more in you.
yep.
The best is when you turn the pages and you're like, oh, there's only 5 pages. Like I can read this chapter.
Exactly.
Yeah, a couple books have sucked me in like that, and I was like, ah, that's a good strategy.
Well, Lisa, not to
Um,
compliment you too much, but the other magic trick that you pulled off in this novel is that you actually managed to make the characters we never see 3-dimensional, which that's impressive. You know, that's a tough thing to do because, you know, all of the tools that a writer uses to make a character come alive were not available to you because you were essentially just summarizing who those people were in their real lives. And yet, I think because of the way you seeded all of that in the characters that they were in Blue Haven, it made total sense. We could imagine all of those people, the lives those people led, even though you really didn't give us any evidence of it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I worried that it was a little risky to do that
It
because
was very risky to do that.
yeah. But also ultimately, I think in my day job, I read so many histories and in these reports on people, and it fleshes them out as these full characters. Although I was still worried that, you know, I was creating different versions of people that once the reader got to that point and realized they were someone different would feel like a little bit disjointed, but I'm very happy to hear that it flowed, that they seemed like the same people, albeit different versions of themselves.
Well, another question is, so Eloise struggled to remember her son due to the immense grief that it caused her. Is the ability to erase painful memories a potential solution? I know that Eloise treats it as a solution.
She's
but
the author.
What do you guys think?
Well, I know I've done that in the past.
I feel like a lot of like there's like people can try and erase things temporarily, but if they're like given the opportunity to erase them permanently, like temporarily would be like drinking or stuff along those lines so that you don't like remember in that moment. But obviously that's not going to keep you from remembering forever versus
No,
if
I literally have things that I do not remember
that you just suppress.
I've completely and utterly suppressed them to the point where people have to tell me and show me evidence.
Do you
So-
think that that has influenced anything, or do you think that it's kind of like not exactly out of sight, out of mind, but like out of memory, out of mind?
I think it's a good thing in some cases. You know, I think it's I think for the things that I've suppressed, it's definitely healthier to be that way. Then there's no value to integrating them. They
Well,
aren't.
there's an entire psychological technique built around helping people forget trauma.
Mhm.
Huh.
Yeah.
But it
You
was fascinating.
you know the
to me
name of
that-
it, Lisa? I'm forgetting it now.
It's not coming to me off the top of my head, but I think
Yeah,
I know what
I mean,
you're
there's
talking about,
this
like-
whole it involves using light and things like that as a
Oh, EMDR, movement desensitization reprocessing.
Yes, that. But I mean, it is sort of carving memories out. But in a lot in cases of extreme trauma, it's sometimes the only way to help somebody deal with it.
I was both surprised and impressed that in the end, you were willing to take your characters and have them make that decision that it was better to forget. You almost never see that in stories like these where the message is really, well, you may have intense pain, but it was worth it because of the time we had together. And I was blown away and really impressed that that's where these characters ended up. And I fully respect you for that, for not going the, you know, the other route.
Yeah, I think I got attached to them too, and I wanted things to work out for them in the best way, and realized, like, trying to connect all the dots and the puzzle pieces together, that maybe there was only one way, even if it wasn't, you know, what we would hope for. In situations of real extreme trauma, usually you're trying to, you know, have the individual reprocess that information, move past it. And on the other side of these things is a lot of post-traumatic growth and resiliency and these great characteristics, if you can get there. And that's not for everybody, right? So I guess I wanted a kind of satisfying ending for all of them. I wanted them to be kind of okay.
As okay as they can be, given
Yeah.
circumstances.
And you left us with such a great way, whether or not you write a sequel to this. I can think of so many profound ways it could go after this. Both
Yeah,
good
there's some
and bad.
options.
Are you considering a sequel, Lisa?
Not seriously, certainly hypothetically. I've had a lot of chats with, like, my husband and sister about, like, you know, where would you start? Would it take place like far in the future when maybe there were havens everywhere and maybe they're trying to dismantle them? So it's,
Ooh.
I think it's really interesting to just think about where a plot line like that could go. I kind of saw this as, like, you know, there's lots of futuristic sci-fi books and shows about places like this, kind of where we end up. This book to me seemed like one step towards that. Like, how could we realistically get there? How does this even happen? Like, how you read about these crazy dystopian societies and you're like, what was the path that got us all here? And this to me is like step one, like getting here, and which seems kind of realistic, is how we spiral out of control like that as a society. So lots of potential ideas for what could happen next.
Well, and you did such a great job breaking down like the entire society too, so we kind of understood how they made everything real. Because like maybe in the future they can do that without having to do like a microchip kind of thing, but like it made it more realistic, not quite like present day, but like it made the idea of it happening so much more realistic, because we were like, oh, like people donated food, like that's the Gordon Ramsay so like that they ate that night, and like the sand only goes, or the like it's like a projection outside, so like that's why it looks like it goes on forever and stuff like that, like kind of like breaking down how they got to that point, which was really interesting to kind of understand where this paradise came from.
Thanks. I'm glad it resonated, because I feel like you kind of have an obligation sometimes to like explain those things that these worlds you've created. And so I wanted to make sure that I actually did that and made it seem like plausible in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, and certainly the ending where they find a way to monetize it, like absolutely. That's not even futuristic.
Speaking of the ending, what did you guys think about the ending for all of the main characters specifically? So like, is this the best that we could hope for like Eloise, Jack, Bibbs, Wesley, Bob, and Franny? Or do you think that they would have done better if they had taken it like a step further?
To me, it felt like it was a good ending for the principal characters at the point they were at and the state of the technology of the time. Hopefully something improves with time. The only thing that I was disappointed with was, and felt was a little too cliche, was the monetizing. And I think it's absolutely what would happen in that situation. But everything else was really so surprising as it developed. Like when I'm halfway through and I'm saying, if this is another zombie book, I'm going to cut my head off, and then thank God it's a science fiction story after all. But that was the only thing that of the whole book let me down, because I wished it could have been something a little as over the top as some of the other choices. But I'm not dissatisfied with it, you know. I think this was such a fabulous book, really.
Thank you. And I mean, like, totally fair enough. I think what I really struggled to write this ending. I wasn't sure what direction it should go. And ultimately, I wanted it to land a bit more on the side of reality, like what I thought would happen. And I think in grad school, I'd seen so many of these new kind of innovations start in one place. And then now, like 10 years later, they're in a totally different realm. What started as like these sort of therapies are now like video games,
Yeah.
right? And so ultimately, I guess the clichéness of it maybe comes down to the fact that we are sadly cliche and predictable as like a bunch of humans.
Yeah.
Shoot.
And while the ending clearly isn't like quite happy, what about the idea of like the Havens is so unsettling just overall?
I have to be honest and say, all I kept thinking the whole time was, I'm a person that can't be with handwork, some kind of handwork. I work in textiles. And I kept thinking, are there any books around here? Is there any knitting? Is there any, and I'm sure you could get it, you know, I could tap and get a mirror to bring me what I needed. But I was just like, don't these people do anything? You know, like there was nothing, they could do anything, but there was really nothing to do, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
because
that's a
I'm
good way of putting
I
it.
wrote that one off because I'm the same way. I wrote that one off that other than the one guy, the Bibbs, nobody's been there really that long yet. But that was the one thing that I saw as a real potential problem going down the line, is the fact that now that we've got somebody who is not quite as smart capitalizing all of this, he's not going to realize that he's going to have to keep a whole staff of people inventing new scenarios for these people to keep them entertained while they're in this environment, or something really horrible will happen. And that's why there's so many potentials for sequels in lots of different directions, because it's so unfinished. You know, it's so not ready for prime time, this whole thing.
No.
And that's what's charming about it too.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about change too. Like, I feel like it's just like a very common narrative that most people, if not all people, are afraid of change. And yet without it, what are we? Like, while everyone might be afraid of change, we're also like constantly have to go through change. And without it, I feel like it's just
Yeah,
kind
people
of takes
aren't
away the whole
afraid of
life.
change. They're just afraid of change in certain aspects of their lives where they
That's a
don't
good point.
have control.
Mm.
We are born and bred, and at this point in society, programmed for change. We don't have a choice. We really can't live without it.
Yeah, Annalise, you're bringing up an interesting point. My brother-in-law used to be a writer on one of the reality TV shows, and he was a writer for those reality. So he was part of a team that would come up with scenarios to sort of push the drama. And you know, it was back in the day when they were still relatively novel. And I thought, that's horrible. That's horrible. You're like putting things in the way for people to trip over, you know, metaphorically, but that's exactly what you're talking about, putting a story together that people can interact with if there isn't one quite yet.
I feel like I would be more satisfied in Blue Haven. Like, if I were to choose to live there, I think I'd be more satisfied if the whole place was filled. Like, since there was only like 4 or 5 people, I feel like there's only so much you could do with that. But I could probably have a conversation with someone for years. And if there's a good like hundreds of people there, then I'd probably have a better bet of like feeling like there's change going on, even though everything's staying the same. You know,
The fact
because there's
that
all these
Aloe
different.
showed up, and she was really disruptive to the residents.
Oh yeah.
So she was she was creating and inciting all kinds of change and growth for them.
Yeah.
And again, from a therapeutic standpoint, and I'm not saying that people who have too much money don't need therapy, you know, so we can commercialize it. But from a therapeutic standpoint, that could be the solution that allows them to eventually engineer how to get people to graduate from this place. People like Aloe, you know, could graduate with the right engineering. I think the original residents were too far gone before they ever got there. That this is where they need to live out their days. Wesley being the only perhaps exception, but the other two, I don't think there was any hope for.
Well, I mean, even if they got out, what would they really be getting out to? It's like Bob and
Exactly.
Brandy, like they were
Exactly.
homeless. This is the best
That's
home
what
they've
I mean,
ever been
this is
in.
the best thing that could have happened to them.
Mhm. Another question. So Jack loved Eloise and was willing to do anything to save her. Do you think if he knew that their permanent entry into Blue Haven would lead to Amur's overtaking of the company and the ultimate expansion of the Havens, do you think he would have still made the same choice, knowing it was still the only way to save his wife?
I think he would have put better security in place before he went in. I think he was smart enough to figure that out.
Yeah. I think it says a lot about like true love too, and like the sense where he's willing to really do anything, even like kind of forget who he was and everything that he was, really, to go somewhere. And even though he's not the one with the big mental issues, like he's still willing to go somewhere where the whole purpose is to improve your mental health, when his mental health's kind of fine, besides the fact that his wife is spiraling very quickly and tried to kill him that 1 or 2 times.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question since I came up with it like 2 weeks ago. But what would Jack do if he was in kind of like a head-to-head battle between like his love for his wife, or knowing that his decision would ultimately turn into kind of the commercialization and veer the company away from all their ideals? Like, what would he choose? And to be honest, I don't know. For a while I was like, I think he'd go wife, but then I'm like, Jack's really like a man of morals and principles, and I think he would be very disturbed by this idea. So then I was like, maybe just go society. But I haven't come up with anything. I didn't ultimately pick a side, but it has been a dilemma that I've been thinking through for a couple weeks now.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that one?
I just think that he's such a smart guy that he would ultimately decide he could engineer to have both.
That's a
No
good
matter
point.
How awful and how apparent the choice was, he would believe that he could outthink it because he's a smart guy.
I feel like he would come to like a conclusion kind of along the lines of being 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Like if he could make it possible for him to be in Blue Haven, but still be able to leave Blue Haven. But the hard thing there, of course, like the juxtaposition would be the fact that he wouldn't remember, assuming that he was still like the microchipped when he goes in. But I feel like if he was going to find a way, the way would probably be like him writing himself a note in his room saying, if you want to leave to improve society, like go now, you can come back. But something like that, where like he leaves for short periods of time, but he would obviously have to make that make sense to Eloise, which he could easily say, oh, I'm going to go do a full day spa once a week and just leave.
Oh, he could easily engineer something.
Oh yeah.
Who knows that he didn't?
That's a good point. I mean, maybe that's what the next book will be. And another question. So Eloise and her team set out to improve mental health care for very sick patients, but their work resulted in the opposite, commercialization. Which do you think matters more, an intention or an outcome?
Always an intention.
I don't know, because I feel like an intention does not guarantee an outcome, but yet if your outcome happens without the intention, but the outcome's still good. I mean,
One of
because
my
the
whole
outcome's really
mottos,
the thing.
one of my whole mottos in life is every action begins with an intention. Know your intention. That I live by that.
I
So-
like that.
That's fair.
I might live
never
by
would've
that
happened.
too.
It never would have happened without an intention though. So I feel like it's hard to
Yeah.
have one without the other. Like I don't think she would have accidentally stumbled upon this type of outcome. Because if they were trying to make like a paradise, actually, I don't know. If they were trying to make a paradise and they were like, "Ah, everyone's mental health keeps getting in the way. I feel like this would make total sense. Like if the goal was to make a paradise, not to make a mental health facility, that they could still get to this outcome, but yet not have that intention originally.
Yeah. Intentions can take a turn for sure, but there's
Yeah.
always that original. I think people, I don't know, that just might be my, oh, but I just feel like people, if you know your intention and you stick to your intention, yeah, things work.
Well,
and I
it's
feel
gonna
like-
be, it's gonna be a real mess when we realize that all of these people that we got, who bought seats in here can't leave. Mentally unstable if they do, there's gonna be hell to pay eventually for this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole point of starting this, I think, I don't know if Bob and Franny was still part of it, but like the point was to improve them so that they would be able to leave. Because like at the time, Blue Haven wasn't really particularly sustainable. Like it is to a point, but you still need a lot of funding. And once they commercialize it, that's a different story. But I feel like the whole point was so that they could figure this out and then they would be able to leave. So it didn't get to the point where the patients are like itching to leave. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And I feel like part of the microchip too had to have something to say like you don't want to leave, or like their life here is so much better that why would they even consider it? So there's that point.
Yeah,
Um,
intentions versus outcomes are tricky. Big
Yeah.
philosophical questions there.
Yeah. So the last resident admitted to Blue Haven was an unsatisfied woman. Do you think Havens would be a popular choice in today's society if given the option? Yeah. Yeah, I
See-
could definitely see
Seeing
that.
what we just went through, I think so.
Yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of people are very willing to like forget everything that's going on if they can live like a satisfying life for themselves. Like they're very like just from like societal norms as a whole, like it seems like people are more not exactly like overall, but like people are like very interested in self-indulgence, which is just true of our society in general. And if they had the opportunity to be self-indulgent 24/7 for the rest of their lives, can't imagine why they wouldn't go.
Yeah, I think it would be quite popular. And for some people, it probably would be a really good thing, right? People who
Yeah.
don't have much or are really struggling in their lives, don't have, social support. I guess I worry most about the folks who would make the decision on a whim based on perhaps a failed relationship or,
Mm.
a temporary solution. And this is a permanent situation for you versus based on something that might be kind of temporary in your life and overcomable. So yeah, I could see some people being happy there and some, kind of regretful and sad family members. And
I think that's a good point. Well, I feel like also it just like while they might be happy to go, like its effect on society as a whole would just be overall negative. Like it would be positive for the people that it helped, but just I feel like the fact that people know that it's an option, they're kind of like, well, why am I dealing with all of these trivial everyday problems when I could be in Blue Haven? Like, what about the people that work in Blue Haven? Like,
it encourages
They can't.
people not to solve problems and overcome them, right? It encourages people
Yeah.
to kind of flee their lives once they get to a certain tipping point of either suffering or grief or anger, that they have a way out. Not a particularly great one overall for society, I agree.
well, and that's a good lead into this question. Technology offers incredible promise and an opportunity to solve problems while also creating others. Are today's innovations evolving too quickly or being implemented too carelessly?
I have a 5-year-old who really wants to get a TikTok account, so that's kind of my perspective at the moment.
Well, and just like kids with iPhones, like there's so many like little kids, especially like a lot of parents kind of like turn off parenting when they give their kids like an iPad or a phone or something to watch or do, where they're not really thinking, they're just, I don't know, in a trance.
Well, I think you could go and say this in historical terms, that technology always precedes by dramatic levels our ability to actually handle it in meaningful and useful ways. It takes a long time. And some things, I mean, I could say that we're still wrestling with automobiles, whether or not they were a technology we should have adopted for the lifestyle changes they've created. I think it'll take another couple of 100 years to figure that one out. So who knows where we are with what's happening with electronics.
No, I totally agree there, especially like technology is such a hard one because like while it's helpful, it's not really, it's only helpful if you only use it to help and not to distract. And I feel like it's very prominent in its distracting level.
That's not the
Versus,
fault of the technology, though.
that's a fair point.
I mean,
Yeah,
if
we're,
we
like,
didn't
drawn
have
to it.
technology to distract us, we'd still come up with stuff for distraction.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's just, I mean,
I feel like there's a lot of like healthier distraction. Like when I was younger and I didn't have really like anything, I would always just use like a book. I would read a book, and that's a more healthy distraction as opposed to watching TikToks or social media or just like seeing what other people are doing. Like obviously what we're doing with the technology is definitely like a big thing, like social media, the implementation of social media.
well, social media is evil, but you know, I still think that everyone growing up is going to look at the next generations following and say, well, I didn't have those choices, so therefore I'm better for it. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, I think you have to get pre-agriculture to not see that sort of thing going on. So
Yeah, that's a good
that's again, that's our DNA.
point.
Gets us into trouble.
Yeah.
And I mean, those are themes that I look at, and I try to interpret our world in terms of these really, where are we as human beings? Because I don't think I think technology might kill us faster, but I think that's the only thing is it's just a matter of speed. It's not a matter of desire.
It's a good point. Speed is huge. Like now you can find out anything just at the tap of your fingers in 3 seconds, as opposed to reading a whole book or reading a plethora of books to find out one answer. And we are at 4 o'clock. So any last final thoughts that anyone has?
I wanted to ask Lisa a question about even with the break in between, the years in between, when you were writing, do these characters start to infiltrate your dreams when you're sleeping?
A little bit, yeah, actually. I think with the large gap, I had Aloe as a character and turning into Eloise. So I thought about her quite a bit, and you know, who she was and who she was later in life. And then for sure, some of the other characters kind of like popped into my mind as the years went by. But I actually get a lot of my writing ideas from dreams. I think that's when I'm sleeping, my brain is like, all right, let's get back to that project you were, and the narratives and stuff kind of come together. I wake up and I'm like, hey, that was a really good idea. So I guess they were percolating the whole time.
Yeah.
Any other last thoughts?
I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
so
you
much,
for
Lisa.
coming. This was great. So thanks for
Fantastic.
having me, and thanks for the chat. It's really nice to connect.